You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
I think I've reached that point in the summer where I've just gotten really, really lazy. Like, it is hot, it is humid, and when the weather's like this, I really don't have the energy to plan and prepare and cook the nutritious meals that I need because, listen, I'm in my late 30s and my metabolism ain't what it used to be. And I know I'm not the only one who feels like this. Like my friend Clem, who's been trying out Factor meals for me because she's in the States and, well, I'm here on the Emerald Isle. And she was raving about the marinara and mushroom lasagnette because you know yourself, when you put a pasta dish in the microwave, a lot of the time it can dry out. And zucchinis tend to turn to mush when they're nuked. But the textures in these were absolutely perfect. Every time she makes a meal, she sends me pictures of it, and I am having serious food FOMO. All of Factor meals are designed by chefs and they're dietitian approved. So you get to have a well-balanced diet without compromising on flavour. And they're not frozen, they're always fresh. And best of all, ready in 2 minutes. What are you waiting for? Today is the day to kickstart that healthy routine. And you don't have to worry about lack of choices. With 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every week, you'll always have new flavours to explore. You can treat yourself to restaurant-quality meals that feature premium ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, and blackened salmon. Head to factormeals.com/whatnow50 and use code WhatNow50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's code WhatNow50 at factormeals.com/whatnow50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active.
It's a fact. Heating and air systems are wonderful, right up until they don't work. If your HVAC system is more than 15 years old, or you find yourself making frequent repair calls, it may be time to invest in a new system. Estes Services can help you determine the right course of action and help you save money on your energy bills. Visit estesair.com to schedule your free estimate today. That's estesair.com. Save money and hassles with an estimate from Estes Services today. estesair.com. That's ESTES air.com.
Hello, delicious friends, and welcome to Who Did What Now, the history podcast that's not your history class, with me, your host, Katie Charlwood, history harlot and reader of books. It has taken me 5 times to try and record this intro because there's a dumbass in a rally car going up and down the road outside my house. So it's not been fun. Also, have you missed me? Yeah, I've been MIA, I know, for a few weeks. I had a family emergency, and the family member at the epicenter of that is very private, so we will not be discussing that at this time, but had to go be a grown-up, sort out some stuff, and resulted in me having to cancel some shows and my Edinburgh trip and the stuff that was going to be happening over there. But everyone has been so kind and gracious because I told them, the actual situation, and everyone has been so lovely and considerate. Like John D. Ruddy, who was supposed to be my guest in Letterkenny, the venues that I was going to be working with, everyone has been just like absolutely delightful. And it's just so nice to know that compassion exists out there in the world. And I like to think that that's what we have. Like, I might call some people dicks, but we've got compassion. You know what I mean? Yeah. In fairness, the people I call dicks deserve to be called dicks. And it just reminds me of my favorite like 1-star review. It was like, she's so unprofessional. She called somebody a dick. And it's like, oh, they were a dick though. I don't know what else you want from me. But yeah, it's been a busy couple of weeks, and I really wanted to get myself back into recording again. I didn't want to miss anymore, and now that I'm back on track, like my time is freed up a little bit more now, meaning that I can record again. I'm working on the book. I'm going to be looking at book covers. Where there's mock-ups of book covers. I'm so excited. You would not believe how excited. I'm so excited. So there's that. Like, I haven't been able to work on the book because I've been just like up to my neck, to be honest. But I'm like back writing again, and I'm just feeling so much better about the whole thing, And yes, I've got a few more gigs coming up. I'm actually doing an In Conversation with Esme James, a Kinky History. We're going to be down at Hodges and Figgis on the 27th. Now, that's completely sold out. Like, those tickets sold out within 24 hours. Like, they were gone, because I went to go share it again, and I was like, babe, they're gone. Like, they're all gone. And it's amazing. I'm so excited. I'm so excited to chat to her. Oh, so good. And my outfit is so amazing. And also next month, September, on the 14th, I'm in Cork. I'm in Coughlin's Comedy Cavern. I'm going to be there doing this. What will the topic be? Guess you're going to have to show up to find out. So that's going to be fun. I don't know if you've ever travelled from Donegal to Cork, but it's the top of the country to the bottom of the country. I'm hoping I will survive and not be exhausted on the night. But I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, quit your jibber jabber and fact me. In fact, you are well. But first, we've got to get our source on. And our sources are Lady Jane Grey, a Tudor mystery by Eric Ives. The Sisters Who Would Be Queen, The Tragedy of Mary, Catherine and Lady Jane Grey by Leanda de Lisle. A Treasure of Royal Scandals by Michael Farquhar. Elizabeth's Women, Friends, Rivals and Foes Who Shaped the Virgin Queen by Tracy Borman. The Betrayal of Mary Queen of Scots, Elizabeth I and Her Greatest Rival by Kate Williams. And of course we have The Boleyn Files and our favourites, History.com and Biography.com. Are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then let's begin. So I was thinking about chatting about these two ladies for a while. Well, today is going to be one of the sisters, and the next episode is going to be another of the sisters. Which sisters, you ask? I say as if you haven't read the title of this podcast already. That would be the Grey Sisters. Now, with the cancellation of My Lady Jane on Amazon, it just seemed like the perfect time, because I've been wanting to talk about these, and I was going to do it on the Patreon or have it on like the subscriptions, but I was like, no, you know what, y'all have been waiting for so long, like it doesn't seem fair to just like chuck it away behind a paywall or anything. And so here we are, and you're going to hear about the Grey Sisters, this time being Catherine Grey, the middle child. Now, I have done an episode on Jane Grey, the 9 Days Queen, who really didn't bloody deserve anything that happened to her. She didn't. And I like the idea of historical fiction which actually gives a happy ending, because, you know, history for women, statistically, quite shitty, to be honest. Oh, did I even do my disclaimer? Do I even do that anymore? Should I start doing the disclaimer again and just be like, she swears like a sailor, what are you doing? I was like pals to be like, listen, exit stage left if you don't like cuss words. But yeah, Lady Catherine Grey was born on the 25th of August 1540 at Bradgate Park in England. This is the family home of the Grey family. And 1540, for context, should probably give you some context, King Henry VIII, still alive. He's still kicking about. This time he's married to a teenager. And if you're thinking, that doesn't sound like a coincidence, you'd be right. So back in the day, in fairness, they still do it nowadays. People get named after other people all the time. And it's a way of showing respect to like royals, nobles, celebrities. You know how it is. So back in the Tudor era, there were so many Henrys because Henry was king. So Henry was king, so many Henrys. And then Catherine of Aragon led to other Catherines being named, like Catherine Parr. So when Henry is married to Jane Seymour, Lady Jane Grey is born, and she is named Jane, you know, to honour his wife. So then 5 years later, when Catherine is born, she is named Catherine, because he is married to Catherine Howard, who he then, who he changes the law about so that he can retroactively kill her for adultery, for treason. Because line of succession, affecting the line of succession before they were together. It's a whole thing. Anyway, it's not too bad though, because obviously after that there's Catherine Parr, so it's okay that she's called Catherine, because she survives this. It's pretty good. So why are the Grey Sisters so important? Well, their mum, Frances, was one of the daughters of Henry VIII's youngest sister, Mary Tudor. Now, he had written his will, basically writing out any of Margaret Tudor's children or heirs out of the line of succession, because they were in the line of succession for the Scottish throne. So because they were for the Scottish throne, he didn't want them, infiltrating the English crown or whatever, even though, she's his sister. Anyway, not important. So, whole issue there. So they're basically written out of the line of succession, which leads after Edward, who is Henry VIII's youngest child, but only legitimate child with a penis, effectively. So he's first in line for the throne. He's seen as legitimate because he's Jane Seymour's son as well. So there was no messing about there. That was a marriage. This kid was born. Everything's great. Golden star. So Edward is first in line, followed by his older sister Mary. And then after that, his other older sister, Elizabeth. So directly after Henry VIII's lineage, it's the Grey Sisters. They are the next in line to the throne. So it's basically Edward and then 5 queens. So you would have, Mary's not born yet, but you would have Mary Tudor, Elizabeth, Jane Grey, Catherine Grey, Mary Grey. So, but again, Mary's not born yet. So Catherine, she is the middle child, and she is born to Lady Frances Brandon and her husband, the Duke of Suffolk, Henry Grey, right? So that's them. Now, the 3 girls, they're not technically, they're royal, but they're not princesses. But they get treated like they're princesses, because here's the thing about being a woman who's royal. In the past, you're a commodity. You're a bargaining chip. So for a lot of people, it was seen as a really good step towards the throne. You're going up the ladder because you're linked. So marrying one of the Grey Sisters puts you so much closer to the throne, because you're it's their cousins. You are connected. So growing up, Catherine, like her sisters, is very well taught. She's well read. So they learn languages. So they're learning Latin, obviously, because they're Protestant. So they have to, I say Latin because they're Protestant. Latin for a bunch of reasons, but religious stuff. Although they were let's do it in English, it's fine. But traditionally, Latin prayers. So they were taught Latin and Greek and French. They studied music, because in the Tudor court, music was just part of the deal. You were expected to be able to play and perform and charm. So they learned about the arts and all that. And of course they had religious education. And so that's what they did a lot of the time. And so she grows up being pretty smart. And it's good that she's Protestant because, at this moment, because Edward's on the throne. Edward is also Protestant. And so he's more likely to lean that way when it comes to the line of succession, because all of his advisors, many of whom I think are bloody Seymours. Suddenly Seymour is standing beside you, changing your will to benefit him. Yeah, so basically they're doing that. And Edward, he rules over England, Wales, Ireland a wee bit for about 6 years. And then when he's 15, he was a boy king, by the way. So he's raised in this very aggressive way where he's an absolute dick. He is, he's such an arsehole. But he's a child, so he can't fully be blamed for that, because the people surrounding him and advising him were also arseholes. Shockingly enough, they were men who wanted power for themselves. So when he's 15 and he becomes incredibly ill, the rats start scurrying off the ship and they start scheming and plotting, and they're thinking like, how are we gonna like infiltrate this and marry off like the Grey Sisters? And enter stage left John Dudley. John Dudley is desperate for power. He's absolutely, like we've spoken about the Dudleys before, they are just so linked. It's ridiculous how many just like parts of royal history they like sort of get their little claws into. But he's there and he's thinking, I want to elevate my station. What if I made my son king? Because they're like, we can make it work. Like, nobody's going to want a queen on the throne. And so if we marry into the royal line, we can, boost up ourselves a wee bit. And so Dudley decides that he's going to marry his son, Guildford, to Jane Grey. So she's 15, she's the same age as Edward. And Catherine, who is 12 at this point, and she is married to Henry Lord Herbert. Like, she's 12. It's still weird. I don't care if you be like, oh, it's fine because it's the past. No, this is an unusual situation. Like, royals are married off for alliances, but they weren't like married and expected to consummate the wedding. That's not a thing. Like, not at this age. It was seen as untoward, right? Now, Mary, luckily, the third Grey sister, she's only 8 years old, so she's not involved in this weird marriage scenario. I mean, she is betrothed, I should say that, to Arthur Lord Grey of Wilton, who's like another cousin. So yeah, this is a child bride wedding, a double child bride wedding. That's not fun for anybody. It's creepy. I don't care what anybody says. And Frances, she throws one hell of a party, because of course she does. We will cover Frances at a later date because she is something else, let me tell you. But yeah, it's a massive wedding. Anyone is there. Like, even Edward VI, the sick king, is there. Like, it's the place to be. Now, unfortunately, not long after that, Edward dies. Like, crooks it. And so the whole succession thing gets thrown up in the air. Now, before he dies, before he passes away, like, he has changed his will, naming Jane as the heir. Now, at one point, there was actually plans to have Jane sort of marry Edward. Like, that was an option that they were trying to push because it just kept it together. But also, family tree should not be a wreath. Hate having to keep repeating myself here, but your family tree should not be a wreath. Like, you should not have to 23andMe before you date. I'm sorry. No. That's too much. No. So, Jane is the 9 days queen, and that does not go down well. Mary I comes in. She has people following her because, like, a lot of the country, they supported Mary, and they supported Mary because she was seen as like the rightful heir, being the oldest legitimate child of Henry VIII. And people still loved Catherine of Aragon because like she was like a pretty decent, pretty smart, pretty cool queen at the time, and they remembered this. So a lot of people, just for honour's sake, supported Mary. So Dudley and Henry Grey and Jane Grey and Guildford, they're all chaos, right? Jane Grey didn't really want to be queen. She was forced into the situation. And so yeah, everyone is thrown into jail, and eventually everyone is executed. So like, all of them. And the thing is, it had to happen because they tried to like restart a rebellion against Mary. Like, I think Henry Grey and John Dudley did. And so they got the kibosh, obviously. And as a result, Jane's fate was sealed. Because, as well, you've got this sectarianism throughout England. And so you've got Catholicism versus Protestantism, and they're just, there's just a massive war consistent, like sort of bubbling under the surface. And so her existing, with people believing she's the rightful heir to the throne and being Protestant, very much a big deal. So this has repercussions. There's the jail, there's the execution. Jane Grey is just done. And she's only 16. Like, she's a fucking child. Like, yeah, she's a teenager. She was a child. I don't care what anybody says. It's just horrific. And so the Herbert family, they end up annulling the marriage because they don't want to be associated with, like, the Greys at all. And then, and the Wiltons, they decide to cancel that betrothal as well. They're like, no, we don't need that. So at this point, Catherine Grey is 14 years old. Her dad is dead. Her sister is dead. She has her mother and she has her younger sister Mary. So they are pariahs at this point. So no one wants to be associated with the Greys. Nobody wants to be involved in this. And then you've got Mary the First, who could at any opportunity just decide to get rid of the Grey sisters, the remaining Grey sisters, but instead she invites them to court, and they are treated with utmost respect and dignity. So Frances and her two girls, they're brought to court because she's like, you weren't involved in this. I think probably because she herself and her mother were subject to Henry's just pure arsehole behaviour, that she's more likely to have a bit more leeway when it comes to others. And so Catherine as well, at this point, is a potential heir to the throne, even though she's Protestant. And if she were to bear a child, I suppose as well, if she hasn't like overtly done anything, having her close by is probably better for Mary. Because if Catherine has any kids, they become like a line of descent, which is what people would really want. Like that's the whole point, because monarchy has to live on. But is it compassion? Is it just like trying to keep an eye on them? Whom's to say? But yeah, Mary brings them to court. She overlooks, their possible connection to any kind of rebellion, and that's fine. And so she's like, you can come here. They become sort of ladies of the bedchamber, which is sort of like the highest rank you can get, because you get to have like one-on-one time with the monarch. So if you were sort of a lady or lord of the bedchamber to the king and or queen, like this was like the top of the pyramid. Like this was a very coveted position. And I mentioned this in the George Villiers episode. This made you one of the more important peoples in the court because you had access where no one else could. And so having the Grey sisters be there, it really elevated their status. And they even had like special places in Mary's coronation, which I think also helped appease the Protestants of court and of the country, because she's fine to them. I mean, she did burn a couple hundred as heretics, but like so did like Elizabeth when it came to Catholics. And don't get me started, if Edward was continuing, like if Edward like kept going the way he was going, I think he would have been the bloody one out of everything. But yeah, like Elizabeth, they've got a special place in Mary's coronation, and they are treated like royal princesses when they're at court. Like they have their own ladies in waiting, like carrying their trains and stuff. Like they get treated with respect. They have just like a very high status. And they end up being guests at like the big royal wedding. So when Mary marries Philip of Spain, who is yet another arsehole, I know you're thinking, what, a royal man being a prick? Yes, indeed. Now, there were rumours as well that Mary was going to adopt one of the Grey sisters, which again just like when this rumour goes round court, I have a feeling Frances spread that one personally, because she's always trying to elevate her station. Because she's like a momager of 1500s England. And so she's trying to boost them up. And so this kind of made them even more tantalising. And so it also put their prospects on the marriage mark like so much higher. So during all this, speaking of Frances, she marries just like this dude. And I mean just this dude. His name's Adrian Stokes. And his like social like rank is like way, way below hers. And it's almost as if, like, I think she did it, one, to protect herself, and two, oh no, actually no, both to protect herself. I was like, it's all to do with protecting herself, because if she were to have any more children, because she's Mary Tudor's daughter, like, if she was to marry someone highborn, like, her kids would like jump into the line of succession, especially if she ended up having a boy, right? And so she doesn't need that target. And by marrying someone, I mean, he's not a commoner. He's just like not as high ranking as she is. And so it's much better for her. It's much safer. And we'll probably go into this. Now, she ends up leaving royal court. And so like Catherine's supposed to follow her, but Mary keeps her. So she ends up in the care of Anne Seymour. Yes, indeed, the Duchess of Somerset. Now, Anne is the widow of the former Lord Protector, who for Edward VI. And Anne, she's the guardian. She's supposed to have Catherine under her care, but Catherine's, like, she's supposed to be sent away, but she's still at court. And she ends up becoming besties with Jane Seymour, who is the niece of the deceased Jane Seymour. So, yeah, there you go. So these two become besties at court, like the same age. They end up sharing a bed because it's bloody cold. It's cold, right? You need body heat. That's how it goes. And so they're having a great time. They're teenagers. And so they're serving the Queen together. They're hanging out. And they're just like having a great time. So these two being connected as well. So because she's related to Jane Seymour, she's not like so closely royal, but it's a good connection to have. And Catherine Grey, being who she is in the Tudor family wreath, she's pretty important. So those two being connected is very good status-wise for both of them. And it also helps that they both suffered the same sort of way. Like, they're the same age, they grew up in similar circles, both their dads were executed for treason against the crown, just girly things. And like, because of their connections, like Jane Grey was like put forward as a possible, like a prospective wife for Edward, and like so was Jane Seymour. Like, they were both put forward as prospective future queens. But then, of course, Edward dies at 15, so that doesn't happen. Now, things are going well. They're enjoying times in the Tudor court. And then, 1558, flu just starts sweeping through Tudor England. Influenza is fucking everywhere, right? And so people are fleeing court. Like, they're just heading out to the countryside, out to the manors, to try and avoid, the very contagious death. So basically, if you got sick, if you had any of the symptoms at court, like, you're being sent home because they don't want to like spread it about. And so Jane Seymour, she gets sick and she gets sent home. Now, when she gets sent back to Hamworth, which is like the family house, who comes with her but her absolute bestie, Catherine Grey. So she's allowed to go with her to keep her company because they're like, maybe good spirits will keep her from the cold, icy hands of death. And what do you know? It did. Now, while they're there and they're over in Hamworth, Who does Catherine meet but Jane's brother, Edward? Yes, also called Edward. A lot of the names repeat, lads, a lot of the names repeat. So Edward is known as Ned and shall be called Ned for the remainder of this story. He's 19, he's tall, dark, handsome, and Catherine Grey, allegedly, I mean she's only like 17 at this point, but allegedly absolutely stunning. So she's got the Tudor hair, so it's like red and wavy and gorgeous, and like piercing blue eyes and pale skin, like she's just like gorgeous, stunning, fabulous. Now, like every single Seymour man, he's a bit of a dick. Ned is arrogant, and apparently people were like cool with that or whatever, and yeah, but apparently Catherine was into it. And being the super cool bestie that Jane Seymour was, she's passing notes, like secret correspondence to each other, because here's the thing. Who Catherine marries is really, really important, and how that will affect Mary is also hugely important, because if Catherine gets pregnant and has children, again, they become heirs to the throne. Big deal, super big deal. And so she has to ask permission from, whoever's on the throne, to who she can get married to. And because, again, the Seymours are so connected to, the royals and nobility and everything else, like this would be an incredibly important match. And yeah, it would be, and it would cause a bit of a commotion. And these two fall in love the way that two horny teenagers do. So they are in love. And again, Jane's sort of sneaky weaky about it. But then Jane's mum, she finds out about this whole scenario, and she's like, you have to stop this, because those two being together is just, it's a target on the back for the family. Like, without Mary's permission and acceptance, this is not good. And so she tries to put a stop to it. Now, there's this like theory that Ned is like after sort of the power and connection that one would have, like sort of marrying a Grey sister, especially how connected she is like to the line of succession and to the throne and the whole sort of court. But like if he wanted to do that, he would be better like sort of raising his standing with Mary and sort of getting permission and doing it publicly and doing the full courting scenario. So then it could be like legit, like you want it legitimized, you want sort of that support. But they're being like sneaky little teenagers. They're just... But Anne, who's obviously Catherine's guardian as well, is like, we need to stop this. Like, I've seen a lot of relatives, lose their heads, not metaphorically, well, also metaphorically, but also quite literally. So could we maybe not wrap me up in a treasonous plot, please? Thank you and you're welcome. Now, when it seems like the sort of influenza panic is easing down, sort of Jane Seymour and Catherine Grey, they are brought back to court. And this is where things start getting a bit more difficult for the middle Grey sister. And I think this is a perfect time to take a wee pause and get a message from our sponsors.
It's a fact. Heating and air systems are wonderful, right up until they don't work. If your HVAC system is more than 15 years old, or you find yourself making frequent repair calls, it may be time to invest in a new system. Estes Services can help you determine the right course of action and help you save money on your energy bills. Visit EstesAir.com to schedule your free estimate today. That's EstesAir.com. Save money and hassles with an estimate from Estes Services today. EstesAir.com. That's ESTES Air.com.
Hi, I'm Neil.
And I'm Lauren.
And we're both moderately successful trivia podcasters.
You co-host Triviality, and I co-host Misinformation, a trivia podcast.
But we decided to get together to make our own podcast, curated by chance.
because we both love to talk about the topics we know a lot about. I'm an art curator who also teaches art history to engineers.
And I'm a filmmaker and author who loves movies, but Lauren hasn't seen a lot of movies. You're telling me you seriously have never seen North by Northwest or The Devil Wears Prada?
What's that? And Neil doesn't know a thing about art. So every week we use 3 random prompts from our trusty algorithm Chance, designed by a NASA scientist.
The great curator.
That will help us come up with weekly topics to tell each other about, whether it be an artwork, a movie, a book,
A pop culture event, a Broadway show, or even a TV show for dads, like Bosch.
So listen in every week to join us, 2 good friends with generalized anxiety disorder who aren't going to apologize for excitedly talking about the things we love for the first time in our lives. They made a TV show about Hieronymus Bosch?
Not the one you're thinking of.
And we are back. So, Catherine Grey has been having this sort of romance, this teenage, hormone-fueled romance with Edward Seymour. And Jane Seymour, the niece of deceased Queen Jane Seymour, she has been acting as a wee go-between, passing correspondence, yada yada. Now, Jane and Ned's mum, Anne, she's trying to put a stop to, being murdered for treason. And so she tries to end the romance, and they all end up back at court. Now, when they return, because, influenza has been everywhere, is that Mary the First, she's also managed to contract the flu during this epidemic, because of course she does. And so her health has always been kind of dodgy anyway, partially for religious reasons, partially because I think she was suffering from depression. Also, a lot of the Tudor women, they had sort of, I'm going to call it reproductive issues, because they would suffer sort of tumours and issues regarding the womb that probably would have been better if they were studied, but, men in history didn't think that women's health was important. Good thing things are different now. Anyway, so Mary I, she's got chronic health issues at this point, so there have been the false pregnancies. I think, what was it? They thought there was like cysts at one point, tumours at another, and she was having phantom pregnancies, which, yeah. But she also had this habit of starving herself for Jesus or whatever, and that's not a good way to stay alive. Like, intermittent fasting is good for you. I don't give a fuck. No, I don't want to be hungry. Now, she was so ill that it didn't really come up, the opportunity for like Ned and Catherine to be like, hey, we would like to be betrothed, thank you. Can we get permission? Didn't really have that option. And so, yeah, unfortunately, before they get the chance to ask, Mary dies. So when Queen Mary I passes away in November, Catherine has like a massively important job. So she's one of the ladies in waiting who's involved in embalming Mary, and she has to take turns like guarding the coffin. Like they all take turns like standing around the coffin. I don't know if you happen to see any of sort of the pageantry around the death of Queen Elizabeth II. So there was a sort of period of time where all the family members took turns sort of guarding the coffin. And so that's the kind of thing that she would have done. So Catherine was one of the ladies in waiting who guarded the coffin for like the 24 hours before the funeral. Like that's just like part of the process. So obviously Mary I, she's dead. And so the next in line to the throne is Elizabeth I. So Elizabeth I, she's queen, she's on the throne, and that makes the next in line Catherine Grey, which is either a really good position to be in or a really bad position to be in. Now, although they had been promoted by Mary into like this higher position and treated like princesses, treated really well, their reputation still wasn't great because, the whole thing of their families trying to ignite a rebellion and usurp the throne. So that did lose them a few friends, that whole situation. And because, the whole putting Jane on the throne situation didn't work out. And Elizabeth, wasn't keen on having the Greys as close as Mary did. Like, I don't know if it was more of a hindrance that they were Protestant like Elizabeth was, or whether that was sort of more worrying to her because it gave them a more valid sort of right to the throne. Like, you've got a few factors at play here. You've got Jane being seen as a martyr at this point because, you know, people are sort of seeing her as a pawn in this game and they're getting a wee bit more aware of it. And so there's that. You've got the fact that Edward had named, you know, the Grey sisters as the heirs. Jane had also written a letter before she died saying that Catherine was her political and spiritual heir. So that is floating about. And then you've got the fact that Elizabeth I is a paranoid bitch. And I love her. I love Queen Elizabeth. She's chaos, and she's going to be like a 2-parter episode, I think, because there's so much going on there. She's so messy. I love it. But she's pure chaos, and she's paranoid, and she does have every right to be paranoid. And she's consistently throughout her reign on the fence with a lot of things, and because she wants to protect herself is probably the best thing, because she saw everything that happened before her, and she's not stupid. She was raised by sort of Catherine Parr and Anne of Cleves. Like, when she was coronated, like, she wore the same clothing, so the same coronation gown as Mary I, which is just clever because it sort of showed that succession. It was legitimizing like her place, which I thought was very, very clever. But she's also like the third queen if you include Jane, and they didn't last very long. And she sort of builds upon Mary, but you know, I'm going to do Elizabeth another day. It's going to be 2 parts. It's going to be amazing. I'm going to go deep into that. But she is a paranoid bitch. Absolutely. Again, has every right to be, because people are vying for her to fail, partially because she's a woman, and partially because she's Protestant, and partially because she's Anne Boleyn's daughter. Like, there's a whole situation there. Now, it doesn't also help that Elizabeth is well vain, by the way. Like, she is. She's very interested in her appearance. She's really fashionable. Like, she creates fashion, obviously, but she's really fashionable. She wants to be, like, beautiful and whatnot. And unfortunately, people may or may not have said, they did, that Catherine was, like, the younger, prettier version of Elizabeth. Although Elizabeth's only 25 when she takes the throne, by the way, so it's not as if she's an old maid. But yeah, Catherine was very feminine. Like, she loved like gowns and embroidery, and she loved being the typical feminine girl. Like, she lived for it, and that's, you know, more power to her for it. So Catherine and Mary Grey, they went from being sort of ladies of the bedchamber to being like downgraded to like the presence chamber, bedchamber, privy chamber. Yeah, so she's like, they're like close, and then they're moved down when Elizabeth comes in, because she's like, I don't want you near me, right? She has them moved down so they're less important. And she does this not only to like not have them near her so much, but to show the court that they no longer have that high standing. Like, she is bringing them down. So at this point as well, Elizabeth I and Catherine Grey are the 2 most eligible maidens at court. And the thing is, this is an era where women belonged to their husband, so whoever married them would have power, and when they started producing heirs, like, that was going to be the important thing. Now, it started to become pretty clear to everybody at court and their granny that Elizabeth I was in love with Robert Dudley, who just so happened to be married, unfortunately for her. Now, Robert is married, Elizabeth's in love with him, and Elizabeth is not entertaining really like suitors. Now, the funny thing about Robert Dudley, you're thinking, oh, Dudley, that's a name I've heard. Yeah, that's because he's related to John Dudley, the brother of Guildford. That's right. John Dudley was his father, one of the people executed in the rebellion against the crown. Yeah. So he's got a free pass. Catherine Grey doesn't have a free pass. So like, yeah, he was her brother-in-law for a while. Before Jane obviously, got her head chopped off. So yeah, that's her ex-brother-in-law. And Elizabeth's in love with him. So they all kind of grew up sort of in the same sort of, I don't want to say era, but like they were very much from the same pocket. So they would have known each other. Now, it gets to the point where Elizabeth's like, I'm not marrying anyone. I am married to England. And everyone's like, shit. Like the advisors are stressing out. Like the dignitaries are stressing out. Court is stressing out. Like everybody is just freaking the fuck out because they're like, what's going to happen now? And what's going to happen? Because if she doesn't have any heirs, like it's going to jump again. It's going to be weird. And it's going to be a whole situation like it was, which brought Lady Jane Grey to the throne. And there's going to be upheaval. They don't want upheaval. People don't want upheaval. They want a solid society where they're not going to get, executed for treason. And so things get a bit tetchy at court. Like in the presence chamber, allegedly, Catherine does something to like annoy Elizabeth. Like, I don't know, just like muttering or just looking at her funny. And Elizabeth's just like, no, can't be having that. And it's just like, it's enough to make people notice. And like Catherine's complaining to like the Spanish ambassador, who like obviously doesn't like Elizabeth because of the whole, her mother getting rid of, Catherine of Aragon. And there's like an issue there. Like deep-seated. And so he starts scheming. Because Philip of Spain marries Mary I's widower. Like he was trying to court and marry Elizabeth because he thought that would be an easier sort of grasp to the throne. Also, he thought she was younger and hotter than Mary. And then when you bring Catherine Grey, who is younger and hotter still, they're like, wow, what if we married Philip off to the young Grey sister? And Philip could, I don't know, take over England? Like, wouldn't that be fun? Now, Catherine she's still like really interested in Ned Seymour, like that's who she's all for. But she tells the Spanish ambassador, who's like, yeah, I'd totally marry, like, Philip. Why not? It's totally cool. I don't know if she said it out of like anger or whether she just wanted to fuck with Elizabeth because, she's a teenager. Is she a teenager? Well, she's young enough anyway, and she's like mad at the situation. And so he like seriously starts trying to plan out like how to go about this. He's like, how am I gonna like stage a kidnapping and like take her to Spain and then get her to marry like the King of Spain or another like fairly decent noble, and we'll have like this really good strong connection and take over England. Meanwhile, again, Catherine is still like really into Ned, but his mum was just like, no, don't be dealing with her. So he was, blowing it cold. And so maybe she was trying to make him jealous. I love the idea of like, I'm going to make my sort of boyfriend jealous or my ex-boyfriend jealous by committing treason. Like, I mean, it's an extreme way to do it, but you gotta respect the drip. Like, you gotta. Meanwhile, also, Elizabeth is just being outrageous because everyone talks about how like she was respected and loved during her time, but people were freaking out all the time about her because they were struggling anyway, the fact that she was a queen and not a king, because they're like, how can she wear a crown and rule us? She doesn't have a penis. Like, it's as if she needed testicles in order to like have the wherewithal to rule. Now, not only is she like ruling as a woman, which was enough of a headache for royalty and the common folk, I guess, but she's also like just consistently flirting with Robert Dudley, like the married Robert Dudley. And obviously you can't not flirt with the Queen because, treason. Like, she could like find a way to chop your head off anytime she wanted. Probably could. So yeah, she's sort of causing a scene, and people don't know like how to go about it because they don't want to go against the Queen, but also they don't want to have to deal with the Queen. And while everyone is completely distracted with Elizabeth being Elizabeth, Catherine and Ned take this opportunity to actually spend time together because he's sort of moving in closer to her now. And he ends up heading off to see Frances, her mother, to, ask for permission to marry her. And knowing that this is going to strengthen, her sort of link to the crown, Frances is like, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, of course, she's not completely cold-hearted because she goes to Catherine and she's like, do you actually want to marry this strapping young fellow? And she's like, absolutely, yes, I do. And so they decide that this is a good idea. Now, of course, they do not want to be executed for treason for defying the Queen, and so Frances comes up with a plan, and that is to convince sort of higher-ups in court, the Privy Council, all that kind of stuff, that this is a good match, so you want to get them on side. And so they want to get, like, numbers behind them, and so they wanted to get this on so that the councillors would be on their side, so that the Queen, spoke to her council, they'd be like, absolutely, let these kids wed. But Ned, unlike Frances, is not the most articulate or charming of people. Again, remember how I said he was like an arrogant arsehole? Yeah, might have worked for Catherine, didn't really work with the councils. And so he's trying to convince, the councillors and everything that he's good. And they're like, no. They're just not feeling it, and he doesn't have Frances to back him up because a month later, she dies. And so, Frances doesn't even get a chance to write to Elizabeth to be like, hey, let my daughter get married. Love Auntie Frances. Like, she doesn't get a chance to do that. So Frances is dead. And Catherine and Mary are the chief mourners. Now, Elizabeth does pay for the funeral because, it's her auntie. So she pays for it. She forks out for it. And Catherine Grey and Ned Seymour are becoming aware that their time is running out to get married. And Ned's kind of worried because he thinks that she's going to leave him for some Spanish royal. Because the rumours are swirling that stuff's happening. Because of course it is. Because, she wanted to get back at him. Now, after this whole scenario, because Elizabeth is still, unwed without children, she actually starts mentioning that she might adopt, Catherine or Mary, the Grey sisters. Now, this is something, and it could have been just to, solidify and keep Elizabeth her throne. Seems like she was sort of playing up to it. Enter stage left to the rest of the Seymour family. So you've got Jane Seymour, her absolute bestie. You've got Henry, who is Ned and Jane's brother. And so they start acting as a little group, sort of espionage. They're passing notes back and forth, correspondence. They're finding ways for Ned and Catherine to have time together. And people at court, they're starting to cotton on to this. They're starting to notice it's happening. But unfortunately, Elizabeth, throwing herself all over Robert Dudley so much is, much more of a deal, so they're more focused on that. Especially when Lord Dudley's wife, Robert Dudley's wife, dies in a suspicious/mysterious accident. And this incident, whether it was planned, whether it was an actual accident or whatever, This meant that no matter what happened, because of that suspicion, because there was a theory that Elizabeth arranged it so that she could marry Robert, and because this whole situation happened, she was never going to be able to marry Robert. So naturally, Elizabeth is pissed about this. Meanwhile, her chief counsellor becomes very aware of the situation between Ned and Catherine, and being very aware that this will cause just a huge disruption and could, destroy the entire society as a whole and, the country. So he convinces Ned to, cool things off with Catherine, stop stealing kisses and whatnot. And Ned listens for a while. And then they say, fuck that for a game of soldiers, and decide to get married anyway. And so they get married without the Queen's permission, which is an awful, awful idea. So when the whole crew have to go to London, and Elizabeth decides she wants to go hunting with Dudley and has to bring her ladies in waiting with her, like, Catherine excuses herself by way of toothache, because it's the 1500s, and they're like, please just don't die of pain. And so she says yes, because at this point they had introduced sugar, but they had not yet introduced ways to combat that, like bicarb or minty fresh, aqua fresh. You know, they hadn't got Colgate yet. It wasn't happening. And so they're like, go rest. And Jane Seymour offers to go with her because she's like, I'll look after her. And that's fine. So off they go. And so they get to leave because everyone's focused on Elizabeth and Dudley. Now Ned, in a crazy random happenstance, is in the area, and so Ned gives his servants all the day off. Catherine and Jane, they, using subterfuge, or what I assume will just be cloaks, as they walk so people don't recognise them. So they leave the palace, they kind of sneak out, and they go to Ned's London home. Now, of course, he's given the servants the day off, so, like, they're trying to be sneaky about it. Now, some of the servants are actually leaving as Catherine Grey and Jane Seymour arrive, so they see this happen, and, like, they're aware of it. And then, in a completely inconspicuous move, Lady Jane Seymour runs out to find a priest, specifically a Protestant priest. And what do you know? She finds one, brings him back to Ned's house, where he marries Catherine Grey and Ned Seymour for the sum of £10, which is, like, literally thousands, like 4,500 like pounds in today's money, like roughly about that. Like, it's a good chunk of change. Now, Jane, being the decent sister / bestie, like, so she has, like, food and stuff sorted for them, but these are, like, he's 22, Ned's 22, Catherine is 20, and they've been waiting this for a long time, and so they officially consummate their marriage. Like, they are at it, they are shagging away, boom, boom, boom. So obviously Jane leaves them to it. God, I hope she left them to it. Now, allegedly she left them to it because I don't think she needed to watch that. I wouldn't suggest that. These two, secretly married. They have to go back to court and do their thing. Now, they don't get to spend, like, a full evening together, like a full night, because people would notice. But then people would start noticing, like, the way the two of them are with each other. Now, Jane is still, like, passing on messages back and forth, being sneaky. But again, like, the head counsellor, he's aware that some shit is going down. And so he sends Ned away to Europe. He's like, you need to go away for a while. Off you go. And this is where things start to get a bit sticky. So Ned is being sent on this extended trip to Europe just to get him out of court. Catherine, as it turns out, is pregnant. And then Jane Seymour, the only witness to their wedding, dies of tuberculosis in 1560. And, like, she's only 19 at this point. Like, she's so young. Now, he ends up writing this letter, basically saying, a sort of will, if you will. Basically saying, if anything happens to me, please know I am married to Lady Catherine Grey. And then he buggers off to Europe anyway, right? So now, imagine being Catherine at this point. She must have been shit scared, because there she is. Her best friend is dead. She's secretly married, and she's pregnant in the 1500s. Like, this is not a good time for her. Now, of course, she does her best to, like, hide the pregnancy for a while, but of course, she's not going to be able to hide this pregnancy forever. And so she's writing letters to Ned, basically trying to tell him to come back and, you know, don't leave her to deal with us all on her own. Now, he doesn't get the letters. We don't know why or how, but he doesn't get the letters. And so of course, Catherine is panicking. She can't get hold of Ned. She's pregnant, and she's thinking, you know, so many members of her family were executed for treason, and she is pregnant with treason. Probably not a good place for her to be. And so she's thinking, what if I get married to someone else? And so she ends up writing to Henry Lord Herbert, you know, the guy that she was married to before their wedding was annulled. And so they start like courting and whatnot, but then he realizes that she's pregnant and he calls it off because, you know, he doesn't want to be involved in that. And then it gets to the point where she is 8 months pregnant. Cannot really hide the bump, this lovely lady lump at this point. And so she's hoping that she can use a buffer, you know, someone that can talk to Elizabeth on her behalf and, you know, maybe ease into it and not have her, you know, executed for treason. And so she ends up chatting to one of the women of the Privy Chamber, who then breaks down in tears because she's like, you've made me an accessory to treason. And so the very next day, everyone knows Catherine Grey is pregnant, or Catherine Seymour, I suppose at this point, is pregnant. And Catherine is very aware of this. And so she's like, okay, this buffer didn't work. Why don't I try Robert Dudley? Because he was my brother-in-law. Like, Elizabeth is super fond of him. Now, Robert wasn't too happy with Catherine at the best of times because he held a grudge against the Grey family because he felt like they had, you know, tainted his family's reputation. Even though it was his family that were pulling the strings, that's not the point. That's not the point, but he's got a chip on his shoulder. And he probably thought he could use it to his advantage, so because if Catherine was pregnant, she has the next heir. And so if he speaks to Elizabeth and tells her this news, she'll want to marry him and have the next heir. Lest we forget, Elizabeth I, not a chill girl. She is livid. So Catherine did not get her permission to marry anyone, so she's well offended. She might be carrying the next heir, so she's just paranoid at this point because the baby in Catherine's belly, because of Ned's lineage and Catherine's lineage, like, the claim to the throne would be so strong. Like, it could sort of incite people to remove Elizabeth from the throne, and she was not about that. So she does the only reasonable thing, which is have Catherine locked in the Tower of London. She gets Ned brought back from Europe so she can lock him up too. Now, Ned just is like, I didn't get any letters, and he kept trying like not to come back because he didn't want to be, you know, convicted of treason. And Catherine, who is ready to pop at this point, is being interrogated in the Tower of London, and they're just trying to get her to like implicate people in this big political scheme when it's just a 20-year-old fell in love and got married, like, because of the circles that she's in. You know, her pickings are very particular, and the idea that this is just chance, that she wasn't like trying to like usurp the throne, like, yeah, people, we weren't buying it. So he eventually comes back and he goes to visit Catherine just to figure out what they're going to do. Because if their marriage is deemed legitimate, then the baby's legitimate. Everything's sort of, I mean, it's not good because they've created, an heir to the throne, which is not great because Elizabeth is well mad. But if their marriage isn't legitimate, then the baby is a bastard, it's born out of wedlock, and those two are like guilty of illegal shagging, effectively. So it's not super either way. Then, of course, Catherine gives birth in the Tower of London, and she gives birth to a boy. So there is finally a Protestant heir to the English throne. Like, this is just a massive, massive deal. And she names him Edward, sort of after his father and after the previous king. So Edward is the next, and he's the next male heir. So he's the next one in line because he's a man, effectively, or because he's male. And so baby Edward is baptized, like, basically in the same place so many members of his family were executed. Like, that's a weird start for anybody. Well, I mean, I say heir, like, he's not legitimate yet, so it's a bit of a wibbly wobbly thing, but people are freaking the fuck out. And so while she's in the Tower of London, she ends up getting like pets. She's got like dogs and monkeys and stuff. And she's there resting with the baby. And the people who are sort of looking after her, or, you know, the jailers, quote unquote, like they take pity on her because, you know, she's just had a kid and stuff. And Ned is in like the same building, but not in the same quarters. Eventually, they let them share their quarters again. Now, eventually, the two of them spend time together and they are like boinking again. And what do you know it? Catherine becomes pregnant again. Because of course she does, because this is her story. Now, back in the Tudor era, like the only thing you needed to prove that your marriage was like legit, I mean, if you didn't have your witnesses, well, was to prove that you had like stated it openly in front of the witnesses, which Ned and Catherine said they did. Like this is the why, like you could technically have sex before marriage in sort of the Tudor era if you were betrothed, because the rest of it's paperwork, you know? So Catherine gives birth to another boy, Thomas Seymour. Now, it doesn't matter about Edward. Edward could be deemed as illegitimate, but because of everything else that Ned and Catherine have done since then, because they have proclaimed that they want to marry, right? This baby is definitely legitimate. And so this is just a massive headache for Elizabeth I. But like public opinion was siding with sort of Catherine and Ned, and all the issues with Elizabeth, people were like, no, like, I mean, it's a really good story. They fell in love, they were in the tower, they've got kids, like, it's a big thing. And so she can't, like, declare Thomas illegitimate, so she does the only thing she can, which is she brings Ned, like, to court. She puts him on trial. I shit you not. Seducing a virgin of blood royal. Like, seducing a virgin of the blood royal. And there's this whole conspiracy charge. And he is charged £15,000, which is just too much in today's money. Just too much. Like, he wouldn't have been able to pay this. And then it starts coming up to the 10-year anniversary of the execution of Lady Jane Grey, which is not good for Elizabeth's sort of public standing. Then the plague hits England, because of course it does. It's in London, and she is freaking out. Catherine is freaking out, and she wants to like be saved and go away from it. And so she has people like beg Elizabeth on her behalf, and she goes, yeah, sure, you can totally leave, but you only get to take Thomas with you. Like, she separates her from her oldest son and her husband. So Edward and Ned go and stay with Anne Seymour, Ned's mum. And Catherine is sent to live with her uncle. Now, Catherine is, like, she's not long had a baby. She's sad, she's upset, she's under house arrest away from her husband. And so she writes a letter to the Queen, hoping that they'll be reunited. And Queen Elizabeth, unsurprisingly, said no. Now, the uncle that she was under house arrest I guess, he starts like a plot to try and name Catherine as the heir, which she's like not interested in. She wants to be with her husband and have her babies and just do that, right? Now he gets caught, unsurprisingly, and then he gets executed for treason. And so Catherine and Thomas get moved again. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's dealing with the whole Mary Queen of Scots situation, so she's like doing all this stuff to Catherine Grey, and she's doing this stuff to Mary Queen of Scots. Then, you know, the mysterious death of Lord Darnley, another episode, listen to it, it's very interesting. And more chaos ensues. And Elizabeth I is getting more and more paranoid. And so Catherine, she just keeps getting moved from house to house. And like when she gets moved to like the 5th house in 7 years, they're told just to not communicate with her at all. And then when her new jailer, I suppose, sees her for the first time, he's like so shocked because she's so pale and thin. Because all these people are trying to make like Catherine Grey the figurehead of like these rebellions against Elizabeth, and she just doesn't want to be a part of it. And it gets to the point where she's just so depressed, she's just constantly being moved around, and she ends up effectively starving herself. And then, on the 26th of January, 1568, a doctor is called for and he's brought to Catherine Grey, and she is not long for this world. And on her deathbed, she she pleads that the Queen will be good to her sons Thomas and Edward and to her husband Ned. And then she asked that tokens would be returned to Ned upon her death, one of them being the ring from their betrothal. And so, Catherine Grey passed away at the age of 28. Now, her youngest son Thomas was 4, Edward was 6, and they survived her. Now, in order to downplay Catherine's importance, instead of being buried at Westminster Abbey like her other royal relatives, she was interred in Oxford, just to kind of sort of play it down. But she did have a proper funeral. They still had the embalming, there was, the vigil, there was the mourners guarding before the burial, the whole thing. Now, Catherine Grey's descendants, they trickled down to Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. So, that line of succession, technically, if you want to be about it, technically her descendants, ended up on the throne. Because now, obviously, Queen Mother, the Queen, now the King. Who knows who will be next? Well, we know who will be next. It'll be the next King. But, yeah, they've now ended up on the throne. And so ends the story of Lady Catherine Grey. If you liked my retelling of this tale, feel free to rate and review 5 stars. Or if you just feel like pitying me, also rate and review 5 stars. You can catch me on the socials. If you message me on Threads, I tend to respond. Do not send me videos on Instagram unless I know you, because I won't watch the reels unless I know what it's about. I won't do it. I just won't. And yeah, I think that's everything. Oh, I'm so glad to be recording again. And it's a good one. We're an hour in. We did well today. I guess it's recommendation time. So obviously I am going to recommend for reading Kinky History by Esme Louise James. Because of course I am. Of course I am. This is a women supporting women household. That's what we do. For watching, just go watch My Lady Jane. You may as well. Go watch it. Amazon... Listen, they like to fuck with us, okay? Just watch the show, enjoy it. And if it's not your thing, that's also fine. That's also fine. And for listening. So this is actually really funny. This week, I've been listening to 2 things specifically. One of which is this stupendium, sort of the Fall in London sort of musical, and the Adequate Wordsmith sort of song. So I've been listening to that, and also the Hamilton soundtrack, specifically those songs with Daveed Diggs having a main role. That just seems to be what my ears need to scratch at this point. And so that is everything this week. Thank you so much for listening. I'm glad to be back, and I'll be chatting to you again very, very soon. Adios, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen, my friends. Bye-bye.